So many things I had to know. Man, we really busting through these shits, boy. Not a perfect person. So many things I had to know. Welcome back, AP Gov students. Today is Engel v. Vitale, another AP Gov required case. I'm going to be going over all the key points that you need to know for this case. I'm going to be going over all the key points from this case that you need to know for the exam. This case was heard in 1962, and it is the first case under the civil liberties theme of all of the required cases. So a New York school district directed public schools to begin each day with a non-denominational voluntary prayer. The key point here is that this is a non-denominational and voluntary prayer, so it's not like an explicit violation of the key point here is that it was non-denominational and voluntary, which provides a little bit more of a nuanced challenge to the basic principle of separation between church and state. So a group of parents, including Stephen Engel, objected to this, arguing that it violated their First Amendment rights. The school district argued, though, that the prayer was optional and not specific to any religion, so they weren't explicitly promoting like one religion. This has to do with the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment, which says that the state cannot establish a supreme religion. So the question here is, does school-sponsored prayer violate the Establishment Clause, even if it's voluntary and non-denominational? And the concept here is the scope and application of the Establishment Clause and how much it can really restrict. Ultimately, the court ruled 6-1 in favor of Engel. It said that the state cannot sponsor or encourage prayer in public schools, even if the prayer is voluntary and non-denominational. The logic here is that prayer is sort of an inherently religious activity. So promoting prayer is sort of promoting... So promoting prayer is promoting religion as a standard, even if it's non-denominational or voluntary. And the key point here is that it established that the government must remain neutral in religious matters. This is significant because it established a strong precedent against state-sponsored religious activity in public schools. It reinforced the separation between church and state. It's significant because it established a strong precedent against state-sponsored religious activity in public schools and reinforced the separation between church and state in schools. But what I think is the most interesting point is how it... But I think the most interesting effect of this case is that it set a standard that the government must remain not just neutral, but almost absent. But I think the really interesting point about this case is that it set a precedent that the government must remain not just neutral, but almost absent in religious practice. A traditional conservative or fundamentalist sort... A traditional conservative or religious... A traditional conservative or fundamentalist... A traditional conservative or religious fundamentalist view of this case, and ultimately like the whole principle of the Establishment Clause, is that they don't believe the founders intended for the government to be totally absent in things like religion, because after all, our government was formed with like phrases like under God and things like that. So some people who hold the view that the United States and its government is like an inherently godly structure or religious structure think that the use of the Establishment Clause has evolved too far beyond what it was probably intended for by the Founding Fathers. As the courts have ruled that not only are the courts have ruled that it's not just the job of the government to as the courts have ruled that it's not just that the government cannot like oppress people for practicing a certain religion, but they must remain completely absent in encouraging religion at all. And I think that's an interesting nuance, and I think that's an interesting perspective on what the Establishment Clause means. But I'll leave it up to you guys in your essays to... But I'll leave it up to you guys in your essays to determine whether that view has a basis or not. But regardless, it is still cited in modern debates surrounding religion in public schools. And as we know in our country today, there's a lot of cases being heard surrounding like parents' rights for over their kids in schools. And as we know today, in the country today, there's a lot of cases being heard about parents' rights over their children in schools, specifically how they can use religion to exempt their kids from certain things. So this case is definitely relevant. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next case, and goodbye.